It's weird because I watched it at home and I've watched the whole thing and it's still making me shake a little bit. It's just stirred up so much emotions because I've never seen my childhood experiences portrayed on television before. You know, we've never seen this before. What made you decide this was the time to tell this story, Tony?
Well, Nicola and Adam Kemp came to me with the idea. Adam Kemp's the other executive producer on this, with the idea of doing a story about a trans kid, and I'd had already written 20 odd years ago a feature film called Different for Girls, which is about trans adults, and I think also I'd written about gender identity in a sense. I've written about masculinity in a sense when I wrote a film called Mark of Cain, and I wrote a stage play called Welcome Home, and they were all kind of exploring the confines of masculinity in a sense. So it kind of just tapped into my sensibilities this time, and I thought that given the kind of hysteria that was going around about this issue, I thought it would be good to really examine it properly in a way that was engaging to a mainstream audience, and so I couldn't have written it without the support and access we got through Mermaids, which was the charity that supports young people and their parents, and the insight and access I got was invaluable. As I say, this isn't something that I could have sat there and in my room and made up. I needed to go out there and talk to parents and talk to kids who were going through this, and so that's where we are.
Before I forget, I want to pick up on Mermaids because they are helping the families that are going through this, and against the backdrop of so much hostility and misinformation and vitriol in the press, and I really feel like they're saving lives. So if anybody has been moved by this and wants to do something for the transgender community, then I think Mermaids are just the best possible group that you could support, really. And I just wish that my parents had them. Did you feel a weight producing this?
I think I felt a responsibility.
Yeah.
But also I feel really lucky to be able to tell a story that I think needs to be told. I think when Adam first mentioned the idea, what was amazing was what you just said, which is it hasn't been on television. There has been some stories about trans adults, but nothing about kids. And yet every time you pick a paper, there's some headline that panics you or thinks that everyone wants to go to one toilet or whatever the stupid headlines are. It just felt like no one was looking at what was really happening. So it felt like such an opportunity. But always when you're dealing with something which people have different opinions about and which is sensitive, you have to be really aware of those people's opinions, but you have to be truthful to the story that you're telling. And what Tony did was, Alison and the other actors, was create a very real family who really had different reactions to the same issue.
Well, I have to say, you're horrible in this. And I just need to put this. I mean, I could literally just sit and talk about Abigail's potty for 30 minutes. But I'm a huge.
No, don't do that.
Are you sick of that at this point? But I'm a huge fan of so many shows that you've been in, including Pride and Prejudice and Gavin and Stacey and everything. And you're usually a bit silly in those roles, but lovable. And I thought, wow, you can be really mean, actually. So it shows your range.
Well, yes, I mean, I sometimes worry that I've got myself in a bit of a comedy slot and I can't, do anything else. And when this came up, although it's not a huge part, obviously, from what you've seen, but the character does appear, obviously, in future episodes. But the main thing that attracted me was this woman who, a woman of my age who is confused. She is a very kind of strong, quite a bitter woman about everything in life. She's, as you saw that thing, soap, what the hell are you doing? Get real, she's that kind of lady. And so it was interesting for me to approach that kind of part and perhaps be the voice of a lot of people who are trying to come to terms with this whole thing and who don't understand and who are ignorant. And so yeah, I think Barbara plays a very important role.
it feels like we're on a journey with all of this, doesn't it? And do you know any transgender people? Do you have any in your family? Was this a new thing for you when you came to the project?
Quite new, very new, yes. I mean, and I suppose it's raised my awareness. So now, as you say, I mean, today on the radio there was the thing about the Girl Guides, a woman that was dismissed because she had, had a conflict over who could use what toilets and where, and I can kind of understand that confusion and coming to terms with it. And hopefully, as time goes on, people will become more aware and more conscious, and we'll sort it out. But it's not an easy thing to cope with.
It's not, and I have to say this, we were saying in the green room, for me this sort of goes back to sort of like Kathy Comes Home, in the sense that it feels like drama that's actually filling in a gap and helping us think differently and shedding light on an issue that I feel that journalism has failed transgender people in this country. It's failed me, failed my parents. It hasn't informed them about the reality of what's going on. And we are not hearing these people's stories. And it's very interesting to me that it's fallen on ITV to actually give this community a voice, because these families are going through so much pain, so much hardship, as you'll know, having met them, I've always said I cannot believe no one's made a drama out of this sooner, because there's so much drama there. Families where friends of the family, so our kids won't play with your kids anymore, sneaking kids out in the middle of the night because they've got tabloid journalists sort of outside, and why have we never heard that before?
It is really strange. But, all credit to ITV, Victoria Fee and Polly Hill, who we work with, straight away saw that's a story that needs to be told, and that's drama. And we were just saying, sometimes television needs to do this. Sometimes television drama kind of needs to, because it's very accessible, because it's easy to watch, because it's telling a good story at the same time. It's easier than watching a documentary which is trying to hammer something home. It just needs to put it in front of you, and then you make your own mind up. So I think in a way doing it through drama is more powerful than another documentary, which we saw some documentaries, didn't we? They were great and really useful and, terrible story, really interesting stories.
I mean, there are parallels between, obviously, when the sort of like the climate is that that people like Mermaids are propagandising children into being trans in the way that 20 years ago there was Section 28, which was about so-called propagandising of children by gay educators, and those and that parallel is quite clear. And now we wouldn't dream of there being a Section 28. But it seems that there is a kind of, that same kind of Section 28 sensibility being applied to the trans community.
I'm glad you see that, because it often feels like a hysteria. People think that you just, as they say, that you're just going to be marched off for a sex change just because you have a short haircut or something. But the reality of the show is that there's all these hoops to jump through. Were you surprised at what people are going through and the sort of barriers that are in place?
Yeah, I was hugely surprised, because all I'd seen was a lot of headlines or in-depth articles, and we were saying this by some journalists who I would expect not to have these kind of very narrow-minded opinions, which were very prejudging everyone, saying people are being pushed into this, there's a, like, the world is changing, therefore too many people are going in, it's a fashion, basically. Yeah. And actually, the minute you look into the process and these families and what they're going through, you wouldn't go through half of that for the sake of fashion. There's nothing light-hearted about this. There's nothing, it's not cool in any way to do this. You do it because you need to do it.
I just love the idea that people think that it's a choice. Why would anyone choose this? I mean, what was the biggest thing that you learned from this experience?
I suppose to keep on learning, really, because I myself, it's not a subject I've ever been particularly interested in, because it hasn't come into my life, and if it doesn't, you kind of you sort of see a bit in the paper maybe, and you think, oh, right.
You'd be amazed, some people are obsessed with us.
Well, maybe. but for me, it's made me think, and it's raised my awareness. But I have to say, I did sympathise with the character of Barbara. This is a spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the future episodes. But when she does bring the subject up and say, look, how old is he? He's 11, he's 12, about, give him a chance. He could change. Kids do change, So all these arguments that come in, I think it's important to have a character that airs those feelings, because
Yes.
people at home will be
Yes.
saying, oh, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
give it whatever.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's quite good to have that. And a lot of those thoughts were my thoughts too, that, I'm trying to sort of catch up with this new thing that's...
And also I think when you hear Barbara in episode 3, when you see where she gets to in her journey, it's not that everything's changed, because it takes a long time, but you understand where she's coming from.
Yeah.
You understand how she's been hurt,
Yeah.
which gets her in the place where she's very quick to judge and very quick to be defensive. So I think that's what Tony does brilliantly, which is he writes characters that don't necessarily have an easy viewpoint, but have an honest viewpoint.
Well, none of this is easy, and I think my mum said a few months ago, she says, if we knew now if we knew then what we knew now, we'd have just put you in a dress and let you be happy, kind of thing. But it's a learning process. But come on, we're all pretty open-minded, right? But if your children came to you and said they felt like this, what sort of feelings do you think that would stir up? It's not a small thing, is it?
No,
It's a
and that's
huge
important. That's why Stephen's character has he's, in terms of the spectrum of understanding, he's a little bit more evolved than Barbara is, and certainly in the first episode that we see. But it's important that he wasn't a knuckle dragging Neanderthal who the objections that he's got, or the nuanced.
You do get
reflection
dads
he's
like
got.
that, though.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting when I went to Mermaids. Every time the mums were always present, there was probably the dads. I reckon I met one dad, actually. Everybody
Right.
else was a mum.
That's interesting.
So they are an absence where mums are always a presence. But at the same time, it's important to represent his problem with it in a way that was nuanced and understanding, and in some ways reasonable. But then, this is a man who's fighting his own prejudices.
Yeah.
It's not just prejudice, is it? Because I think he says at one point, it would be so much easier for Maxine if she wasn't who
Yeah.
she is.
Yeah.
It would, and all you want for your child is happiness, and you want them not to be bullied, and you want them not to be that different. Because
Yeah.
if you're different as a child, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So there is a misguided totally of him going, just stay what you are, because it's going to be so much easier for you in life. It's a really, really difficult thing,
Yeah.
as you know.
Yeah.
So I think it comes from that as well, trying to protect the child.
Yeah, I think that there's so much drama turned out now where people are sort of caricaturing, like, oh, this is a bad man and this is the good mother and all the rest of it. And life isn't like that, is it, really? But were you surprised at just how much abuse these kids get?
Actually, I don't think I was, because I've got
Right.
kids that are very similar age, and
Okay.
I know, my son sometimes has hair that goes too long and it's very floppy.
Right.
Whatever. He comes home and he'll be in tears because someone
Right.
was making fun of his hair. I mean, so I know that kids can be really cruel, and then also, as you see, that parents can be really stupid at times as well.
And what do your kids think of all of this? Because I think actually a lot of kids and teens just totally get it.
Yeah, I think I do see that, less so with him, but more so my girls. I've got teen girls, and they couldn't care less what gender anyone wants to be, what sexuality anyone is. It does feel totally different from when I was at school.
Yeah.
Well, if you think of how we've changed and we've opened up from 50 years ago, no one accepted gay people. A gay man would be, beaten up
Yeah.
or put in jail or whatever it was, and so we thank God got through that,
Yeah.
and now we're actually opening up to this, and hopefully
Yeah.
in the future we'll gradually accept it and learn about it,
Yeah.
and say, look, be free to be who you are.
Well, I hope so. And I'm glad that we're finally at that part of the conversation, because, I mean, I know it does feel like a new thing to a lot of people, but we were always there. I was a trans kid at school. I just wasn't supported. And, you go back hundreds of years and there's been trans people, but it does feel like something that really... It's like a sort of last bastion of sort of bigotry or confusion. People just can't get their heads around this. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think people react so strongly to this issue?
I think it's what you said. It's almost like it's the last transgressive thing that people have to deal with.
Right.
And it might be, for the right who are kind of hanging on to, all the standards have kind of slipped away, and obviously the last redoubt is this, and we have to defend ourselves against the sort of ultimate liberal onslaught, I suppose.
Yeah.
Except what I do find a bit disturbing is a lot of the criticism isn't from the right at all. It's from so-called feminist groups, and it's from people who just seem to want to exclude instead of including. I don't understand the need to
Tell me about
question
it.
what anyone wants to be. I find that quite disturbing stuff.
It's so disappointing, and that's why I think it's great that you're sharing this, because they conjure up this bogeyman of the sort of, I watched Silence of the Lambs the other day, and it's this idea of the sort of the transsexual killer / rapist / pervert, and it's an easy sell, because I kind of think, oh, it's a bit freaky, isn't it? And that whole film actually is, based around when he's putting the lipstick on. You're meant to look at that and think, oh, that's a bit weird. It's a bit pervy. I don't like it. I've got this visceral disgust for it. When in reality, Maxine is what a trans person is, and the idea that she's a danger to the other pupils in that school is ridiculous to me. It's just so nuts. It's clearly those big lads, and there were boys like that in my school for sure. So for people to see that, I hope that they make the connection between that what they're reading about this issue is not matching up to the reality of people's lives. So it feels very authentic to me. And I'm really, really genuinely so excited that you've made this. Like, I honestly think it's the best thing that's been made about trans people in my lifetime. Can't think of anything else. I think you've really done good.
Thank you.
I think, in some ways, the research is everything, that I wouldn't have got. You can't get in. The insights that I got from talking to kids and the parents is they all found their way into the script, and obviously it's important that in terms of, you're right. ITV is an extremely bold thing for them to do, and Polly, who's here, commissioned this. It has to work on 3 levels, I suppose, this show. It has to be a family drama.
Yeah.
It has to be about a love story between two estranged people, and it has to be about Maxine. And I think that, it's important that the family are completely real, so that the problem, like you say, it doesn't become demonised by the sort of fetish. The fact is it's not synonymous with being fetishized. That it's a perfectly normal development and an occurrence in families all over the country. And I suppose it needed to be specific and universal. So it needed to be specific in terms of Maxine's gender dysphoria, but also universal in the sense of this is what the parents are what are parents prepared to do for their children, and what are they prepared to do for their marriage.
Well, we know, that parents would do anything, and I've got friends who've remortgaged the houses so that they can take their kids to specialists and all that sort of thing. When you were writing it, did you have anyone in mind? Because I think Anna's perfect for the role because she brings so much empathy, and I just know my aunties and the women in my family will be watching that and rooting for her and sharing in her pain. Was she your first person, or?
Well, I'd worked with Anna on another show a couple of years ago, and I knew she would bring that kind of reality of authenticity as a mother to this, and also has got the ability to be passionate and nuanced at the same time, and it's and that's not easy. That's not an easy thing to pull off, but. No, she was, and she got behind this. I mean, she hadn't even read 2 and 3 before she'd signed up. She agreed, signed up on just on the strength of the first ep of the script, and so she was just acknowledged that this was an important subject that she wanted to be involved in.
Does it feel different from other projects that you worked on, Alison, in the sense that it's political, in a sense? Like, it is a family drama at its heart, and I think people are just going to watch it because it's good telly, but it means so much to this community, and I actually think is going to make a real difference to people's lives, genuinely, you know, these kids. Did it feel like you were doing something, there's something special about this?
Yes, I mean, I've never approached anything like this before in my whole career. You know, I mean, it's a subject that, as I said before, is quite new to me and is quite new to a lot of people. And that's what makes it so compelling and so interesting, that here we are, you know, with an insight into, you know, the pain that goes on, trying to get this whole thing levelled and sorted and make everyone not happy exactly, but to accept what it is we're given in life and not, you know, push against it.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel for the dad, because there he is with, you know, this son, and he wants him playing football, boxing, you know, and doing all these kind of butch things, and he's got a journey to go where he's got to accept something that's, you know, quite difficult for him. Perhaps easier for a mother, like you said, the mums were there, because it's easier for a woman to accept than it is for a man. Yeah. But no, it's great.
I just feel like when these issues are discussed in our culture, you know, it's almost sort of academic. You know, we think, well, trans people, they're just like a tiny minority. And what's great about this is that you see the character in context. You know, when you're talking about these issues, it's all of those people around them, parents, partners, you know, grandparents, schools. You know, this is not just a niche subject. You know, and I just don't think I've really seen that before. I've only ever really seen trans people on TV when I was growing up depicted as sort of, you know, objects of pity or ridicule or disgust, really.
That was something we determined it wouldn't be. It was a niche show.
Yeah.
You know,
That's what, when you said it's a love story and it's a family story, it should work on definitely on those levels, which is, even if you're not interested in this subject, then you care about that family, you care about them, you learn about the subject through the family and through the characters.
Yeah, because it doesn't feel to me that it's sort of like, oh, we're going to tell you what the right thing to think here is. Like, parts of it felt educational from the perspective of you've gone and researched it, but how did you strike that balance between it not being, you know, we're being PC and we're making a drama now that's going to tell you about trans children, but also getting it right?
I think it's all about character. It's all about characters and the emotional complexities that they have, and you know, and that applies obviously to Emmett and Anna's characters, but it in particular applies to Maxine, because not only, you know, are they going through the gender dysphoria, they also want the approval of their father. They want the family to come back together again. They know that they might be the problem, but they also want to be the solution. And so that child's got so many things swirling around in their head about, you know, to reconcile, and it isn't just the gender dysphoria. It's the idea, the sense that, you know, if the family's been split up, maybe that was their fault. So it's that kind of thing that you want to get out of the character, because then there's just so much more to go. You know, in terms of the way the dynamic gets played out. It just makes it richer.
And you know, really cynically, as a producer, it's a great story. So when Adam first said it, it's a great story. You read it and you go, oh, wow, what would you think? How do I feel? Anything, it could, you know, just as with any story, I think she's right, I think he's right. I don't know, I'm really confused. I want to know what happens to them. Do they get together? Do they stay together? It is a really good story, which is very cynical and very, you know, taking people's stories.
Well, no, that's fine, because we're here to entertain people. But why do you think it's taken so long?
I guess there is, I mean, I suppose Coronation Street, I know, didn't do it in a way that made everyone happy, but Hayley, the character of Hayley, a long time ago put a trans character in mainstream, and that was ITV as well. And I sometimes think it does take a forward-looking mainstream channel to kind of put this to put it as entertainment.
Does it feel safe?
Yeah, well, not just that. It's that There haven't been stories about trans kids, but there's probably been lots of things discussed on smaller niche programmes. But actually, it takes a mainstream programme to get people to sit up and take notice, and
Yeah.
it takes it not wrapped up in a drama, but it has to look great. And we had a great director on this, and it has to look beautiful. We had a great designer. It has to have
a nice
a big
house, haven't they?
Yeah, but it's a lovely Manchester house. It's not particularly exceptional. You were there. It's on a good estate near Stockport. But it needed an actress who people want to switch on to watch, like Anna, in order to go, it's okay that you can talk about this because we're giving you everything else that you feel comfortable with.
Well, I remember going to the Creative Diversity Awards a few years ago, and it was, I think it was the BBC Panorama? They'd done an investigation into care homes and the abuse, and they just won an award for this. And I went up to the guy, and it was at a time when these things weren't being discussed as widely as they are now. And I said, we're working with a group called All About Trans. We want to get more accurate, positive portrayals of trans people on screen. What would your advice be? And he was like a really intelligent, nice guy trying to help us. Like Oxbridge educated, sort of middle-aged guy, and he was going, so transgender. It's like late night Channel 4, sort of like gritty, sort of like it was like drug addiction or something like that. And it's like, why shouldn't this be mainstream? It's totally mainstream. There are kids in schools that are dealing with this stuff, and I really hope that it will get people talking. I mean, what do you hope people will take away from this?
Well, I hope, people, particularly my generation, it'll centre their focus and say, oh, this is happening. We should actually learn about this and accept it and, deal with it rather than, either be ignorant or be wary and say, oh, I don't like the sound of that. Because people do that, don't they? And so hopefully it will make a huge difference.
I think it's important that actually we talk about, the Reithian thing of inform, educate and entertain. There's a lot of information in this show, actually, which is not, but it doesn't come across as information, because otherwise that would end up being condescending, and and we will be accused of propagandizing. But I think that people learn about a subject in a way that they don't feel resistance to learning about it in a good drama. And that was very important to us.
There's just so much rubbish on at the moment, isn't there? No, seriously, there is, and they churn it out for all these different channels, and TV just seems to be so mean. People just being so mean on and all the reality, and actually to watch something that I feel elevates us. I think that's what we should be doing. There's still a space for television, when people seem to be descending into their sort of baser, worst instincts, to actually appeal to empathy and to humanity and to kindness. I think is really noble. And it actually makes me feel like I want to get a television again, maybe.
That'd be good. But you don't set out to do that. You don't set out to be noble and all those values. You set out to make something that you want a lot of people to watch. But I think just by Tony being truthful and honest with the stories that he heard, I think maybe is what ends up making people feel like it's a good thing to watch. But I do think this shows people's worst sides as well. I mean, the drama does really develop, and both parents behave badly, but the whole family is put in crisis mode, before there's any kind of resolution. I think, I just think that's honest. I think it's really honest.
Well, it's drama.
Yeah, it would help that they're not all holding hands saying, this is great.
What did you consider casting a transgender child in the role of Maxine?
We did, and we talked a long time with Susie, who runs Mermaid, the charity you mentioned earlier, and we kind of realised that the stage that the child would have to be at is so fragile in a way, and they're facing so many issues other than being on television and playing out those issues on television in front of a national audience when they haven't come to terms with a lot of what they feel themselves. Would not be a positive thing. She thought it could negatively impact.
I think that's the right call, personally. I think if there's a trans role and there's a trans actor, it brings a greater authenticity. But I think in this case, I think that it's appropriate. And he's great.
And the stage he's
isn't
at
It's so good.
Yeah.
in
What
the
a
journey.
role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a total professional.
And was he worried about getting bullied?
He wasn't worried about anything, remarkably.
He was so
He wasn't,
cool.
yeah.
He was just walking, but whether he was in lipstick or a thing in his hair or whether he was just in his school, it didn't matter. He was always just like, yeah, let's get on with it,
And is he quite a Boise boy in real life then?
He didn't seem particularly. He just seemed totally committed to what he was doing, and
Yeah.
I think he really wants to be an actor.
Right.
So he was very sensitive towards what he was playing. But he stood out, didn't he? We auditioned so many boys.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
auditioned a lot of kids,
And
he
a-
stood out.
In a sort of in a co-producer role, not just that, but she worked with a lot of young actors and did a lot of rehearsals and scenes with the young actors until we felt that we'd got the right child, and that was him. But yeah, she had gone through her paces with about, I don't know, 6-7 young actors that we'd shortlisted.
And also, it's really tricky as well because puberty comes into this. I mean, there's, this is only the beginning of the story. Post-puberty is a totally different story, and actually, so we had to be so sensitive with these boys we were seeing.
Yeah.
Some came in for the second audition and clearly were
Right.
totally past the stage where they could play this part.
Yeah.
A week later,
Are you going to have a follow-up to this, do you think?
we have to ask ITV that.
Or do we want to see it? Well, you haven't seen it yet, but I think I want to follow it on the basis of one episode, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
of course we would. But yeah, I mean, there is, this is. I mean, when we get to the end of the third episode, we know that this is just the end of the beginning,
Yeah.
really. And obviously, in a child like that's development, it would be cross hormones, as you know. I mean, cross hormones at 16, and then maybe surgery beyond that. So there are milestones still to explore. Obviously, this is all predicated around the idea of puberty blockers, but that's just the beginning.
And are you ready for the
Reaction.
fight? Yeah, because Nicola, you were involved with Curious Throat before, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not a stranger to a storm causing. She loves it, like.
I
causing a bit of a
think
stir.
television should cause a stir, and it should make
Yeah.
people sit up and pay attention. And the film that Tony was talking about that we did, Channel 4, it wasn't a film, but also caused quite a bit of...
Yeah, we were pulled before
Yeah.
we could go on.
Because that was about soldiers in Iraq, and
Right.
I kind of think you don't. It's not about pushing buttons, and it's not about being provocative on purpose.
sake of it.
Yeah, but if you are just going to sit quietly in the background, I don't really see the point to making that kind of telly.
Is it something that you've been telling people, Alison, that you've been working on, and what sort of reactions have you?
I've kept it very quiet.
Right. Okay.
No,
Could you start telling people?
Yeah, that surprises me.
No, it's quite difficult to describe actually when people say, well, what have you been doing? And I say, well, I've been playing a grumpy grandma, and then trying because it's so complex and there's such a lot going on. It's not a simple story to tell really, and so I've said very little because I want people to watch it and then come back and say, oh, I see, rather than...
Do you think it will spark
Yeah.
some conversations?
Oh, God, yes,
Yeah.
of course it will. I think this is going to really... open a can of worms is the wrong wrong thing to say, but no, seriously, it will. People will be really drawn into this and will start to think, and it will, churn up a lot of emotions, I think.
Well, I have to. I mean, it gets pretty dark. Like you don't shy. Because at the moment it feels. It got pretty dark there, didn't it? But it feels kind of cozy drama. But it goes to some pretty tough places. Have you sort of been anywhere like that before?
Yeah, I think a lot of family dramas actually, in the really good ones, they can be fun and entertaining and carry you along. But if they aren't digging at what we all, how like I say, sometimes how badly behaved everyone is, sometimes how, you know, great things are, then there's no point to them, really.
Well, it's nothing that's not happening,
No.
you know. So, but it's certainly uncomfortable to watch.
Not very watchable.
Yeah, very, very. No, so genuinely, and you know, honestly, I just don't get excited about anything. You know, I often send things for review, or I've worked with production companies as a consultant and things like that, and it was, you know, I mean, there've been things that have been sort of, the politics have been right, but the drama hasn't been very good. You know, so for something to sort of hit the you know, the nail with, I don't know where I'm going with that, hit the nail both ways, you know, is very satisfying. But it was interesting because I watched it with my friend, and he was crying, you know, and you know, and he's not been affected by these issues or anything, and he's just, you know, just a straight guy, and I almost didn't feel anything when I watched it, because I almost kind of shut down, and it was just sort of like, yeah, well, this happens, you know, and that was sort of like a defence mechanism. And it wasn't until after I'd watched it that I had a bit of a blub, and I was like, yeah, that was kind of how it was, really. But I think it's I think it's really hard to explain. I mean, I don't know if you, presumably, you know, if you're in this industry, you know, that there are, you're here because you know the power that drama can have. But I know that when I was growing up, one of the only depictions of LGBT people that really meant something to me was Jonathan Harvey's Beautiful Thing, and that resonated with me as a working class LGBT person. Even though the character's gay, not trans, I thought I was gay for a bit because I didn't think that I could be trans. And I think that's something that people really hold dear to their hearts 20 years later. And I think that with a project like this, you know, people are going to be talking about this in 30 years,
I hope
you know,
so. Yeah.
and still Abigail's party. Yeah.
Because Maxine at that point was living as a boy, or was to the outside world perceived as a boy, and I think to the audience it would have been really hard to make that leap that, what's your problem, you're a girl. Do you know, it felt like you had to have an actor who was male in order that the audience would understand that he doesn't feel male, and inside she is not male at all. I think it wouldn't quite resonate in the same way if it was a female actress.
I mean, I think my only other thing is because it's like I've come from working in post-production.
Sorry, can I just give you the mic? Just 'cause people
Oh, is that, so sorry.
That's right.
Sorry if I'm terribly loud.
No, you are loud, but
Yeah.
So, can you hear me now? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Sam, by the way. Hi.
Yeah, I think we did. I don't think that we achieved that. And I think just as like when we did Queer as Folk, it was a different time and there were very few people. It wasn't easy to crew up with a load of gay staff either. I think that will come and it will happen. In terms of voices, I would say that we, and I know everyone, I know the people who are sat here who are working in television are open to good, strong voices regardless of where they come from or what they are, always.
And I know that you worked really strongly with Mermaids, because when I was watching it, I laughed at Paige. I was like, she's got that from Susie, you know. I got
that from Susie, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think it was based on Susie, but you drew a lot from the parents that you met.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. No, I mean, and there are obviously some of the Mermaid staff are in episode 2,
Right.
obviously, because we are.
Oh, and you have some actors as well, don't you?
Yeah.
Jake
Yeah.
Graff is in it.
That's
I don't
right,
think that's
yeah.
giving too much away. Does
No,
it?
not at all.
Yeah. Do you think that's the way forward, is having more trans people involved, you know, behind the camera, or, you know, script writing? How do we encourage
Totally.
people
Yeah.
into the industry? Because it's one thing having our stories told authentically by other people. How can we help to tell our own stories?
I think diversity on every level is hugely important, and we are lagging behind in a terrible way. Literally from everything. Still with the amount of women who direct, with the, you know, everything is just really far behind. So we're constantly trying. I think, I just know my own experience from Queer as Folk, which is after Queer as Folk went out, we did have a lot more scripts by gay writers, and we, like as a company, we were sent a lot, a very lot. But But I think that there was a progression. It was the first one. It kind of was out there. It did bring about a change, and I think now we're at the stage when I'm working with Russell on shows where we are only casting gay actors for gay parts. I mean, it took a long time. Or those 3 men in Queer as Folk were all straight, which now I don't think we would do in a million years.
I found out things that you could do watching that programme that I didn't even think was possible.
In other episodes, the other 2 episodes, we do go to well, it's not the Tavistock, but obviously I'd spent time at the Tavistock. We've used a fictitious name for the gender identity clinic, and the Tavistock do make a point which I represent or reflect about the fact that they do encourage the children and the families that come to them to just to think about gender and as a spectrum, and to make sure that the child is happy in their own skin, however that manifests itself. That was something that was that I think that I've accurately reflected in episodes 2 and 3. The Tavistock's point of view. Obviously, they have their own reasons for not wanting their name to be attached to the show. That isn't about lack of approval for the show, but there are other reasons. But the point that you're making, I think, in a sort of is actually that we are. There is another voice that's heard about in contextualising that thought.
Can I just say dramatically though as well that Maxine sees, and I think this is true of a lot of kids, the reason the lipstick's there and the makeup's there, it's not because that's how you be a woman at all. We all know that. But if you are a young woman who is looked on as a boy, I think you grasp those outward signs of femininity, which we're not saying in any way that you're only a woman if you have makeup or if you have lipstick, but I think she has got a sister and she sees that in her sister, and that's what she's looking for. So it's a tiny part of her story.
But also, what I would say is, why does this show have to be more progressive in its gender politics than any other show on television? Because every show that depicts girls and boys, wearing girls clothes that are traditionally associated with girls, and boys wearing clothes that are traditionally associated with, I don't feel that we get into this debate about, this is enforcing binary gender. It's like, well, so is Dolly Parton, and David Beckham, and it's not just trans people, it's not just the trans experience, which is, there's binary gender, but it seems to be that when trans people want in on that, that millions of people are invested in the idea of, these are boys' things, these are, people sitting here are wearing shoes that were bought from the women's section. You're wearing a blouse, you're wearing a jumper that's from the men's section. We all, on some level, unless we completely reject gender, and we're completely, gender fluid, we all express gender to a certain extent. So I didn't have a problem with that as a sort of symbolic way of showing that she wants to express her femininity, but it's of course it's not just about makeup and toys, but that is also a big part of it for me. It was for me. I wanted to play with Polly Pockets, and that wasn't what made me a girl, but I also played with Mighty Max as well, so it wasn't that was what made me a girl. It was just
Yeah, it's also true in terms of the evolution of the show, in terms of 2 and 3, that Maxine's character becomes stronger and more confident. And that has actually much more to do with the agency that she gets, or that she gives herself. Sorry. And also she's got a fantastic role model in her mother, who is a really strong, go-getting woman who in episodes 2 and 3 we see doing really quite extraordinary things to make sure her child's happy. So the idea that we're reinforcing some gender stereotype is sorry, the pun would be bollocks, really, wouldn't it? But there you go. Yeah, that was it was deliberate that she was, that Maxine didn't have a brother, that she had a sister, and I think that it was also about the fact that, the person that's most on board with it is the person closest to her in age, because that generation are on board with it, and there's an intimacy between, the Maxine and her sister, partly because of Maxine's nature, and there's an understanding there, and I think that it also works as a way of she's kind of a lightning rod for the tension that's going on between the parents, in the sense that we're talking about Lily in this, that she's kind of like the go-between between the parents and Maxine, and that was deliberate as well, obviously. But yeah, I think that she needs a strong voice in her own right, and to a certain extent, well, to a large extent, Maxine has looked up to her, and she has been a kind of role model to her.
She was one of my favourite characters, actually. She reminded me a bit of my best friend Rachel when I was growing up. And I think that when you're going through something like that, you need a friend who gets it and just loves you for who you say that you are. I thought it was really sweet. And then also, as it progresses, looking at how it affects her and her struggle, which gave it a lot more depth, I felt. And again, just a really, really great actress. And
yeah, she's terrific. She's really great. And and she has her own journey as well. There is a story of siblings who feel like they have been overlooked, or that all their parental energy's gone in one direction and not in theirs. And that's something she feels more and more aggrieved about. Well, in terms of making the dynamic work as far as Maxine's concerned, it's very important that she had a father as a role model, and a mother as a role model as well, because she was obviously, then you get a proper sense that she's caught in the just in the middle of looking at two identities, and wanting her father's approval for all the male attributes that she's wants to feel, even though she realises that she ultimately is going to relinquish them, and that it was. It just made the dynamic that if just threw it into sharper focus as far as Maxine's concerned, that she had parents from that were from two different genders.
I also think maybe you need that. You need them to be conventional, and I'm not from a conventional family, to kind of bring as many people in as possible and deal with this subject, which is going to be quite out there for a lot of people at home watching this.
Yeah, like I say,
I guess that's another story.
Yeah.
This particular story was about this particular family, but there is always other stories to tell.